Autumn of 1941. A cold wind drives fallen leaves along the broken roads of the Moscow region. German tank columns relentlessly advance towards Moscow. On the General Staff's map, an alarming picture. Fascist wedges breach Soviet defenses one after another, less than 100 kilometers to the capital. Panic in the streets. Evacuation of government agencies. The metro is not working. Moscow prepares for street battles. On one of the last lines of defense, in the Volokholamsk area, the 316th Rifle Division took up positions. Its commander, a short man with an attentive gaze and a quiet voice, Major General Ivan Vasilyevich Panfilov. The fighters affectionately call him Father. He does not shout, does not threaten with a tribunal, but every word he says is weighty and firmly remembered. This phrase, uttered in those days, would become a symbol of the desperate determination of the capital's defenders. It would sound like an oath and an order simultaneously. Behind the division, the heart of the country, the last frontier. Ivan Vasilyevich Panfilov was born in 1893 into a simple peasant family in the Saratov province. His childhood was spent in labor and hardship, a common fate for a village boy in Tsarist Russia. He received his primary education in a church parish school, but his formal schooling ended there. Beyond that, there was only the school of life, harsh and merciless to the son of a poor man. At the age of 22, Panfilov was called into the army. World War I was underway. Here, his natural quick wit, attentiveness, and ability to connect with people became apparent. These qualities were noticed by his commanders, and he soon became a non-commissioned officer. The revolution of 1917 turned his fate upside down, as it did for millions of Russians. Panfilov made his choice. During the Civil War, he joined the Red Army. He fought against Kolchak and participated in battles against the Basmachi in Central Asia. It was during these years that his unique command style was formed. Panfilov was not a desk strategist. He was always among his soldiers, knew their needs, and shared the hardships of campaign life. The fighters felt this and responded with loyalty. A commander must protect his soldier. Ivan Vasilyevich learned this truth from his own experience. Unlike many Red commanders, he never threw men into battle thoughtlessly. Every operation was carefully planned, every maneuver thought through to the smallest detail. In the 1930s, when many military leaders fell victim to repression, Panfilov continued his service. He did not participate in political intrigues, dedicating himself entirely to military affairs. He commanded a regiment, then a division, mastered new equipment, and studied modern tactics. Panfilov's talent was particularly evident in the battles against the Japanese at Lake Khasan and on the Khalkhin-Gol River. Here, he practically honed the tactics of mobile defense, which would later save thousands of lives near Moscow. By the beginning of the Great Patriotic War, Panfilov was already an experienced commander with 3 wars behind him. He possessed a rare quality, the ability to think outside the box. One doesn't fight according to regulations, but according to the situation, he liked to repeat to young officers. Another characteristic of Panfilov was his attention to people of different nationalities. Years of service in Central Asia taught him to respect the traditions and customs of various peoples, to find a common language with every fighter, regardless of their origin. This skill would prove invaluable when he was entrusted with forming a division of Kazakhs and Kyrgyz. On July 12, 1941, it was hot in Alma-Ata. The sun beat down relentlessly, but hundreds of people crowded the square in front of the military commissariat. Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, Russians, Ukrainians, all of them had come at a single call. The motherland was in danger. Here, deep in the rear, in the shadow of the majestic Tian Shan Mountains, a new division was being born, the 316th Rifle Division. Ivan Vasilyevich Panfilov, appointed its commander, carefully observed the future fighters. Shepherds, collective farmers, teachers, students, peaceful people who had never held a weapon in their hands. How could he turn them into soldiers? And not just soldiers, but fighters capable of stopping German tanks. There is little time, Panfilov told his officers, but the quality of training is more important than deadlines. Better less, but better. He developed a special training system. No drill, no rote memorization of regulations. The main thing was to teach them to think, make decisions, and act independently. Every fighter had to understand what he was doing and why, not by numbers, but by skill. The division commander repeated Suvorov's favorite saying. Panfilov personally conducted classes with commanders, showing them how to organize training. He paid special attention to anti-tank training. The fighters learned to dig in, camouflage themselves, shoot accurately with anti-tank rifles, and throw grenades under tank tracks. Panfilov explained. The division included representatives of more than 20 nationalities. Many spoke Russian poorly, adhered to different customs, and professed different religions. Ivan Vasilyevich knew how to approach each one. To the Kazakhs, he spoke of the exploits of the Batyrs. To the Kyrgyz, of the legendary Manas. To the Russians, of the heroes of Borodino and Poltava. He understood that to unite people, one must respect their culture, their history. The division commander said, quote, Panfilov introduced an unusual practice. Fighters of different nationalities served in each platoon. This helped them learn from each other, adopting the best qualities. Kazakhs and Kyrgyz were known for their endurance and marksmanship, Russians for their ingenuity and resilience. Service in the division was built on mutual respect. Officers did not shout at soldiers, did not humiliate them. Panfilov demanded that commanders be an example in everything, in training, in everyday life, in their attitude to service. Quote, he instructed the officers. The fighters felt this attitude and responded with sincere respect. Quote, Dad, that's what they called their division commander, not behind his back but to his face, and he didn't object. In this address, there was no familiarity, but an acknowledgement of a special, almost familial relationship. Every day the division grew stronger. People of different nationalities turned into a single combat brotherhood. They did not yet know that they would soon become a legend, that their feat would go down in history, that songs would be composed about them and films made. By the end of August, the division was ready. Not by peacetime standards, it was far from ideal, but by wartime standards, quite so. The fighters knew the main thing, how to shoot, dig in, destroy tanks. And they trusted their commander. Soon the order came, to load onto trains. The division was going to the front, to Moscow. There, on the Volokolamsk direction, it was to hold the defense, to stop the enemy at all costs. In October 1941, the 316th Rifle Division arrived at the approaches to Moscow. The echelons unloaded in a pouring rain mixed with snow. A raw wind pierced through the greatcoats of the soldiers, accustomed to the warmth of Central Asia. But no one complained. Everyone understood the gravity of the moment. Panfilov personally met each echelon, looking into the faces of his fighters. He knew the real trials were just beginning. Remember, comrades, he told the commanders, gathering them at the division's headquarters. We will hold the defense on a 41-kilometer sector. According to all military canons, such a front requires at least 3 divisions. We have 1. This means we will have to fight not by numbers, but by skill. The division took up a position along the Ruza River, blocking the Volokolamsk Highway, a direct road to Moscow. Ivan Vasilyevich immediately began preparing the defense, applying his special tactics, which would later be called elastic defense. Instead of a continuous line of trenches, Panfilov created a system of strongholds and resistance nodes. Between them were minefields, anti-tank ditches, and masked firing points. Special attention was paid to anti-tank defense. The main threat was German tank wedges. Tanks are not omnipotent, Panfilov explained to the soldiers. They fear swamps, ravines, forests. Our task is to make them go where we want them to, not where they want to go. Each battalion, each company received a specific section and task, but most importantly, Panfilov taught commanders to act independently, to show initiative. If communication is cut off, if you are left alone, act according to the situation. The main thing is not to let the enemy through to Moscow. The first clashes with the enemy occurred in mid-October. German reconnaissance groups probed the defense, looking for weak points. The Panfilovtsi met them with organized fire, counterattacks, not prematurely revealing their main forces. Ivan Vasilyevich personally went to the front line, adjusted the placement of firing points, and talked with the soldiers. His calm confidence was passed on to the people. In those days, the famous Panfilov tactic of fighting tanks was born. The soldiers learned to let armored vehicles pass through the first line of defense, cut off the infantry from them, and then destroy the tanks from the flanks and rear. The main thing is not to be afraid of tanks, the division commander said. A tank is strong when you run. When you meet it in a trench with a grenade, you are stronger. The soldiers quickly adapted to combat conditions. The good training received in Alma-Ata played a role. Panfilov rejoiced, seeing how his children matured in battles. The division commander paid special attention to reconnaissance. He created special groups of local residents who knew every path. Thanks to this, the division headquarters always had accurate information about the enemy. Fighting blindly is like walking through a minefield with your eyes closed, Ivan Vasilyevich liked to repeat. By the end of October, it became clear. The Germans were preparing a powerful strike. Tank and motorized divisions were being drawn to Volokholamsk. The Panfilovtsi were to meet an avalanche of hundreds of tanks and thousands of infantrymen. In these days, Ivan Vasilyevich often visited the units, checked readiness, and talked with the soldiers. He did not hide the difficulty of the situation, but in his words, there was always firm confidence. We will stand. There is nowhere to retreat. Moscow is behind us. General Panfilov possessed a rare gift, the ability to see each soldier as an individual. This quality distinguished him from many commanders of that time, who were accustomed to perceiving soldiers as an impersonal mass, as combat units. For Ivan Vasilyevich, every person had value. Every person was important. I must know my soldiers not only by their surnames, but also by their character, Panfilov would tell his officers. Only then can I properly utilize their capabilities. He often appeared at the front line without warning, not for inspection or intimidation, but to talk to people, to learn their needs, to listen to their suggestions. The division commander could sit by a campfire with ordinary soldiers, share a modest dinner with them, ask about their families, about their pre-war lives. Political instructor Klochkov, who later became one of the legendary 28 Panfilov heroes, recalled, "Father knew how to listen in such a way that a person would fully open up to him." After a conversation with the division commander, everyone felt significant, needed. Panfilov never raised his voice. His quiet speech with a characteristic okanye sounded calm and deliberate. But in this calmness, there was such an inner strength that even the most desperate, brave men felt respect. "Don't shout at a soldier," he would instruct young commanders. "Shouting is a sign of weakness. True authority is built on knowledge, experience, and human relations." A distinctive feature of Panfilov's command style was his ability to explain complex tactical tasks in simple, understandable language. He didn't sprinkle military terms, didn't quote regulations. Instead, he used vivid comparisons, examples from everyday life. Explaining the principles of anti-tank defense, Ivan Vasilyevich might say, "Panfilov possessed an amazing intuition. He seemed to foresee the enemy's actions, to guess their intentions." The division commander could look at a map, at the terrain, and accurately determine where the Germans would strike the main blow. He had some kind of sixth sense, recalled the division's chief of staff, Colonel Serebryakov. Another trait of Panfilov was unconventional thinking. He did not recognize templates, always sought new solutions. In conditions of a shortage of weapons and ammunition, this quality was invaluable. When there were not enough anti-tank weapons, Ivan Vasilyevich suggested using bundles of grenades and bottles with incendiary mixture. When there was not enough artillery, he developed a system of roving guns that created the impression of massive fire for the enemy. Panfilov paid special attention to the psychological preparation of the fighters. He understood the main danger was not enemy tanks and machine guns, but the fear of them. These words of the division commander became the motto of the entire division. Panfilov taught not to be afraid to admit mistakes. He himself never shifted responsibility to his subordinates. If an operation ended in failure, he would be the first to say, quote, "This commanded enormous respect." The soldiers knew their division commander would not hide behind others' backs, would not look for scapegoats. On the eve of the decisive battles near Moscow, Ivan Vasilyevich gathered the commanders of regiments and battalions. He painted a frank picture of the situation. The enemy outnumbered them threefold in manpower and fivefold in equipment. The chances of success were minimal. "But we will fight," Panfilov said firmly, "because Moscow is behind us, because there is nowhere further to retreat, and because we are stronger in spirit." October 1941, Volokholamsk direction. The front fell silent before a new storm. Reconnaissance reported that the Germans were massing forces for a decisive strike on Moscow. Operation Typhoon. That's what the Nazis called the plan to capture the Soviet capital. They were confident. One more powerful push, and Moscow would fall. General Panfilov understood that his division would have to bear the main blow. The 316th Rifle Division occupied a 40-kilometer section of the front, an impermissible luxury by all canons of military science. Such a defense line required at least 3 or 4 divisions. But there were no other units. All reserves had been thrown into other directions. During these days, Ivan Vasilyevich hardly slept. He toured the positions, checked the readiness of units, and spoke with the soldiers. He was seen now in the trenches of the front line, now at the command post of an artillery battalion, now in the medical battalion. Panfilov told the regimental commanders, by his order, anti-tank strongpoints were created in all sectors of the defense. Each such point was a system of trenches, communication trenches, and firing positions. Here were located anti-tank rifles, machine guns, bottles with incendiary mixture, bundles of grenades. Panfilov paid special attention to organizing interaction between different branches of service. Artillery was to support the infantry, and the infantry was to cover the artillery from enemy infantry. Sappers mined tank hazardous directions, and signalmen ensured reliable communication between units. The division commander reminded. Panfilov conducted tactical exercises with commanders directly on the ground. They practiced various action options during enemy tank attacks. The division commander taught. In those days, the famous tactics were born. To let tanks pass through the first line of defense, cut off the infantry from them, and then destroy armored vehicles from the flanks and rear. On the eve of the German offensive, Ivan Vasilyevich gathered the regimental and battalion commanders at the division headquarters. The map spread on the table was covered with marks and arrows. Panfilov pointed to the Volokholamsk highway. On the evening of November 15th, on the eve of the decisive battles, Panfilov addressed the soldiers with a short but heartfelt speech. He did not deliver fiery speeches, did not call for feats. He spoke simply and clearly. These words, spoken in a quiet voice, without pathos, made a huge impression on the soldiers. Everyone understood. Tomorrow, the fate not only of their division but of the entire country would be decided. The night before the battle was cold and clear. Stars, bright and large, hung over the quiet front. In the trenches and dugouts, soldiers checked their weapons, wrote final letters home, and talked quietly. Ivan Vasilyevich did not sleep. He sat in the staff dugout over the map, once again checking the disposition of units, calculating possible scenarios. A signalman was on duty nearby, ready at any moment to contact the regiments and battalions. At dawn on November 16, 1941, the German artillery preparation began. Hundreds of guns unleashed tons of metal on the Panfilovites' positions. The earth trembled from the explosions. The sky was covered with smoke. And then the tanks came. Dozens, hundreds of steel machines with crosses on their armor. They moved on a wide front, supported by infantry and aviation. The battle that would go down in history as the feat of the Panfilovites was beginning. November 16, 1941. Dubosakovo siding. A cold morning, frozen ground, a low gray sky. Here, at the railway crossing, the 4th Company of the 2nd Battalion of the 1075th Rifle Regiment of the Panfilov Division took up positions. 28 soldiers under the command of political instructor Vasily Klochkov prepared to meet the enemy's tank attack. Klochkov, a 30-year-old political instructor with attentive eyes, walked around the positions, checking the readiness of each trench, each anti-tank rifle. A former financial worker, he had become a true warrior, earning the respect of his soldiers not by a star on his sleeve, but by personal example and care for others. Quote, he said, sitting down next to soldiers Natarov and Petrenko. They nodded silently, continuing to check anti-tank grenades. Everyone understood. Today might be their last day, but there was nowhere to retreat. Klochkov had learned Panfilov's main lesson. A soldier must be prepared not only physically, but also morally. Therefore, he spoke to the men, instilling confidence in them. Tanks are machines, and we are people. A person is stronger than any machine if they have a strong spirit. At 9 o'clock in the morning, observers reported a column of German tanks was moving from the direction of Volokolamsk. More than 20 steel machines were approaching the Panfilovites' positions. Behind them, hiding behind the armor, came the infantry. Vasily Klochkov stood up to his full height, looked at his soldiers, and uttered a phrase that would go down in history. Russia is vast, but there is nowhere to retreat. Moscow is behind us. These simple words, spoken without pathos, in an ordinary human voice, had an amazing effect. Each of the 28 felt a personal responsibility for the fate of the country. At that moment, they ceased to be just soldiers. They became the last line of defense of the capital. The first attack began around 10 o'clock. German tanks advanced in a wedge formation, firing on the move. The ground trembled from the roar of tracks and shell explosions. It seemed that nothing could stop this steel avalanche, but the Panfilovites did not flinch. They let the tanks get close and opened fire with anti-tank rifles, throwing grenades under the tracks. The first 2 vehicles stopped, engulfed in flames. The rest continued to move, but not as confidently, changing direction, trying to bypass the dangerous section. The German infantry took cover, pinned to the ground by the accurate fire of Soviet machine gunners. The enemy's plan began to collapse. Tanks without infantry support became vulnerable. The attack faltered. The Germans retreated, leaving 4 burning tanks on the battlefield. But it was too early to rejoice. Everyone understood that this was just the beginning. An hour later, the enemy repeated the attack, throwing 30 tanks into battle. They advanced on a broad front, trying to outflank the Panfilovites' positions. Vasily Klochkov redistributed forces, concentrating anti-tank rifles in the most dangerous directions. He himself lay down behind one of them, setting an example for the soldiers. The second attack was repelled at the cost of heavy losses. 6 Panfilovites died, many were wounded. Ammunition was dwindling. But no one thought of retreating, wrote Alexander Krivitsky, a correspondent for Resort in his memoirs later. By noon, the Germans launched a third, most powerful attack. More than 50 tanks moved towards the Panfilovites' positions. It seemed as if the earth was burning under this armada. By this time, less than half of the soldiers remained alive. Ammunition, grenades, and Molotov cocktails were running out. But those who remained in formation continued to fight. Vasily Klochkov, wounded in the arm, rose with an anti-tank grenade and threw himself under the tracks of an enemy tank. His last words, heard by his comrades, "Russia is vast, but there is nowhere to retreat." The feat of the 28 Panfilovites became a symbol of the steadfastness and courage of Soviet soldiers. They did not allow the enemy to reach Moscow, winning precious time for the preparation of the capital's defense at the cost of their lives. Later, in Soviet historiography, disputes and discussions arose around this feat. Some researchers questioned the details of the battle, the exact number of participants, and the circumstances of the heroes' deaths. But the essence remained unchanged. At Dubosekovo siding, Soviet soldiers showed exceptional courage, stopping the enemy on the approaches to Moscow. The 8th chapter of Panfilov's division entered history with its innovative anti-tank tactics. In conditions of a catastrophic shortage of heavy weapons, Ivan Vasilyevich developed a unique defense system that allowed him to contain superior enemy forces. Instead of traditional linear defense, Panfilov created a network of strongholds, true fortresses capable of conducting all-around defense. Each such strongpoint was a labyrinth of trenches, dugouts, and firing positions. Anti-tank rifles, machine guns, and crews with Molotov cocktails were stationed here. Quote, Panfilov told the soldiers, quote, "The division commander personally conducted training, showing how to fight armored vehicles. He taught, hit the viewing slits, the tracks, the engine compartment." Every soldier knew that even the most formidable tank was vulnerable if attacked correctly. A distinctive feature of Panfilov's tactics was the ability to force the enemy to act according to his own scenario. The division commander taught, "Don't be afraid to retreat if necessary, but retreat is not flight. It is a maneuver to take a more advantageous position." The famous tactic of elastic defense was born, letting tanks pass through the first line, cutting off infantry from them, and then destroying armored vehicles from the flanks and rear. For this, special tank destroyer groups were created, armed with anti-tank rifles, grenades, and Molotov cocktails. Panfilov understood, the main thing was to psychologically prepare the fighters. "The Germans' most terrible weapon is panic in our ranks," he said. "If a fighter believes in victory, he has already half won." The division commander demanded personal example from commanders of all levels. "A soldier looks not at your stars but at your actions," he repeated to officers. And he himself followed this principle, appearing in the most dangerous sectors when it was especially difficult there. A system for training soldiers in anti-tank combat was established in the division. Experienced instructors, those who had already knocked out at least one tank, passed on their skills to newcomers. A real competition arose. Who would destroy more enemy vehicles? Special attention was paid to cooperation between branches of arms. Artillery was to support the infantry. Infantry was to cover the artillery from enemy infantry. Sappers mined tank hazardous directions. Signalmen ensured reliable communication between units. The effectiveness of Panfilov's anti-tank defense was astounding. German tank columns, accustomed to easy victories in Europe, were repeatedly crushed by the steadfastness of Soviet soldiers. Enemy losses in equipment were enormous. German tank crews were surprised to find that Soviet soldiers did not flee in panic at the sight of tanks, but coolly let them get close and struck with certainty. This broke the usual blitzkrieg tactics and forced the enemy to incur unjustified losses. Panfilov's anti-tank methods were studied and adopted by other Red Army formations. The division's experience was summarized in special instructions and manuals distributed throughout the front. The significance of Panfilov's defense for the Battle of Moscow can hardly be overestimated. At a critical moment, when the Soviet command had no reserves to stop the enemy's tank wedges, the Panfilovites, with their heroism and skillful actions, gained precious time to prepare a counteroffensive. The German offensive on Moscow bogged down. The plan for a lightning war failed, and in this lay the enormous merit of General Panfilov and his soldiers, who proved to the whole world, tanks are not all-powerful. They can be stopped if there is courage and skill. November 18, 1941, became the last day in the life of Major General Ivan Vasilyevich Panfilov. The morning was frosty, with light snow. The Germans, enraged by the failure of the breakthrough at Dubosekovo, shifted the main thrust of their attack. Now they were advancing in the area of the village of Gusenevo, aiming to bypass the main forces of the Panfilovites and reach open operational ground. Ivan Vasilyevich arrived in Gusenevo early in the morning. He wanted to personally assess the situation, support the fighters, and adjust the fire system. His MK stopped on the outskirts of the village. The division commander, in his usual greatcoat without insignia and a service cap, got out of the car and headed towards the regiment's command post. Quote, he asked the battalion commander, Captain Samuil Raphaelovich Schwartz. The latter reported, the Germans were bringing up tanks, preparing for an attack. Panfilov listened attentively, then asked for binoculars, and climbed into the attic of the nearest house to personally survey the enemy's positions. What he saw was alarming. No less than 20 tanks and a battalion of infantry were preparing to launch an assault on the positions of the battalion defending the village. The forces were unequal, but retreat was impossible. Moscow was behind them. Having descended, Panfilov quickly issued a series of orders. He commanded that anti-tank rifles from neighboring positions be moved to the threatened sector. He called for artillery fire via radio. He ordered the flanks to be reinforced to prevent encirclement. The main thing is not to panic, he told the commanders surrounding him. Tanks are not all-powerful. Hit them on the sides, on the tracks, and don't forget to cut off the infantry. These were his last instructions. At 10:30 in the morning, the Germans began their artillery preparation. Shells exploded throughout the village, sending fountains of earth and snow into the air. Panfilov, along with a group of officers, was at the command post when a mortar shell exploded nearby. A fragment hit the general in the chest. His adjutant and orderly rushed to him, but it was too late. Ivan Vasilyevich Panfilov died almost instantly, without being able to utter a word. Thus ended the life of an outstanding commander, a man who became the soul of the heroic defense on the approaches to Moscow. News of the division commander's death instantly spread throughout all units of the division. Many fighters could not believe what had happened. Quote 4, they said. But the cruel truth of war was relentless. Command of the division was assumed by the Chief of Staff, Colonel Ivan Vasilyevich Serebriakov. He faced the most difficult task, not only to continue leading the combat operations, but also to prevent a drop in the morale of the fighters after the death of their beloved commander. Quote 5. He addressed the regimental commanders. Quote, the reaction of the fighters to Panfilov's death was unexpected for the Germans. Instead of demoralization and retreat, they saw furious counterattacks. The Panfilovites fought with redoubled strength, as if avenging their commander. For father! For Panfilov! With these cries, they charged the enemy. On that day, November 18th, the Germans were unable to break through the defense in the Gusenevo area. More than 10 tanks remained burning in front of the positions of the Soviet fighters. Hundreds of enemy soldiers found their death on the frozen land near Moscow. General Panfilov's body was evacuated to the rear. On November 23rd, a funeral was held in Alma-Ata. Thousands of people came to bid farewell to a man who had become a symbol of steadfastness and courage during the most difficult days of the war. On April 12, 1942, Ivan Vasilyevich Panfilov was posthumously awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. The decree stated, and his division, already on November 17th, the day before the division commander's death, was designated the 8th Guards. This was a recognition of the exceptional merits of the formation and its commander in the defense of Moscow. Later, The division was named after Major General Ivan Panfilov, which it honorably carried until the end of the war. Panfilov's death was a severe blow not only to his division, but also to the entire Red Army. The country lost a talented military leader, a true people's commander, a man who knew how to turn ordinary citizens into heroes. But his legacy lived on. The tactical methods developed by Panfilov were used on all fronts. His methods of training fighters were studied in military schools. His name became a symbol of steadfastness and heroism. General Panfilov taught us the main thing, one of his fighters later recalled, not to be afraid of the enemy, no matter how strong he seemed. He believed in us more than we believed in ourselves, and this faith made us invincible. On November 17, 1941, a historic event occurred. The 316th Rifle Division was awarded the honorary title of the 8th Guards. This was the highest recognition of the merits of the unit, which stood to the death on the approaches to Moscow. But the joy was overshadowed by bitterness. The very next day, the creator and soul of the division, Major General Ivan Vasilyevich Panfilov, was killed. The division did not just change its number. It received the name of its commander, becoming the 8th Guards Rifle Division, named after Major General Ivan Panfilov. This was an unprecedented decision. To name a unit after its commander almost immediately after his death. "Our duty is to be worthy of Batya's name," the soldiers said. These were not empty words. The memory of Panfilov became sacred to them. His portrait was carefully kept in every dugout. His name was uttered like an oath before battle. After Panfilov's death, Colonel Ivan Vasilyevich Serebryakov took command of the division, followed by Major General Ivan Mikhailovich Chistyakov. Both of them strove to preserve the special Panfilov style of leadership. The Panfilov school is first and foremost respect for the soldier, Chistyakov later recalled. "I realized that I had come not just to a division, but to a large family, where everyone was ready to give their life for a comrade." The new commanders carefully preserved the traditions laid down by Panfilov. Tactical exercises continued directly on the ground. The system of training tank destroyers was maintained. Commanders of all levels continued to be in combat formations, setting a personal example. In December 1941, the Panfilovites participated in the counter-offensive near Moscow. They liberated the very villages they had recently so desperately defended. Local residents met their liberators with tears. "We recognized them by their special bearing, by their confident gaze," said Anna Petrova, a resident of Volokolamsk. "These were true guardsmen, calm, businesslike, without unnecessary bravado." The phrase, "acted in the Panfilov way," is often found in combat reports of that time. This meant boldly, proactively, with minimal losses. Platoon and company commanders made independent decisions without waiting for orders from above, as Batya taught them. In 1942, the division participated in heavy battles in the Rzhev area. Here, the Panfilovites again showed exceptional courage and resilience. German soldiers said with alarm, "On our sector there are black knives." This is what they called the Panfilov guardsmen by their distinctive sign. Black knives that the soldiers wore on their belts. The Panfilov style was especially clearly manifested in 1943, during the battles for Velikiye Luki. The division was tasked with liberating the city, which the Germans had turned into a powerful, fortified area. It seemed that heavy losses were inevitable. But the division commander, Major General Chistyakov, used a tactic that Panfilov had used many times. Instead of a frontal attack, a series of flanking attacks, bypasses, infiltration of small groups into the enemy's rear. The city was liberated with minimal losses. Ivan Vasilyevich would have been pleased, Chistyakov said then, accepting congratulations on the successful operation. The Panfilov soldiers preserved and passed on the precepts of their first commander to new recruits. Veterans told the young about Batya, about his calm confidence, about his care for the soldiers. about his tactical findings. A true cult of Panfilov developed in the division, but not a formal, official one, but a living, sincere one. His name became a symbol of military valor and commander's wisdom. In 1944, during Operation Bagration, the Panfilovites broke through the German defenses in Belarus. They acted as swiftly and unexpectedly for the enemy as Batya had taught them. German generals did not have time to react to the maneuvers of the division, which appeared where it was not expected. The school of heroism of Ivan Panfilov had no analogues in the history of the Soviet army. It was not just a system for training soldiers. It was a philosophy of educating an individual capable of making independent decisions in extreme conditions. The division commander created a unique training model that, in a short time, transformed yesterday's shepherds, collective farmers, and teachers into fearless tank destroyers. Quote, this phrase became the foundation of Panfilov's pedagogical system. He understood, one can equip a soldier with the most modern weapons, but if he lacks an inner core, faith in victory, it will be useless. Therefore, Panfilov prioritized character development over technical training. The first principle of Panfilov's school was respect for the individuality of each soldier. Ivan Vasilyevich strictly forbade commanders from shouting at subordinates or humiliating their dignity. He told officers, the second principle was initiative. Panfilov encouraged independent thinking at all levels, from private to regimental commander. He often arranged tactical games where soldiers and junior commanders were challenged to find a way out of a difficult combat situation. The best solutions were discussed, analyzed, and adopted. The division commander liked to repeat. The third principle was responsibility. Panfilov taught, every soldier in his place must feel like the main defender of the motherland. Not, but. That's how he formulated this idea. A person must understand that the lives of comrades, the fate of the country, depend on his actions. Ivan Vasilyevich paid special attention to the training of junior commanders, sergeants, senior sergeants, lieutenants. He understood, in real combat, they make the key decisions, and success or failure depends on them. Panfilov conducted additional classes with them, teaching the intricacies of managing people. A commander must be a father to his soldiers and a brother to his officers, Panfilov formulated. This meant caring for subordinates and equal professional communication with those of equal rank. An unusual element of Panfilov's system was working with the national characteristics of the soldiers. The division included representatives of more than 20 nationalities, and the division commanders skillfully used the best qualities of each people. Kazakhs and Kyrgyz, with their natural endurance and marksmanship, became snipers and scouts. Russians and Ukrainians, with their technical ingenuity, became artillerymen and signalmen. Panfilov actively used national traditions to boost morale. In Kazakh and Kyrgyz units, he encouraged the singing of folk songs and the holding of traditional competitions. This helped the soldiers maintain a connection with their native culture, feeling not like impersonal quote, but as representatives of great peoples. The most important element of Panfilov's system was the commander's personal example. Ivan Vasilyevich never demanded from his subordinates what he did not do himself. He slept in the same conditions as the soldiers, ate the same food, wore the same greatcoat. In moments of danger, he always found himself in the most difficult sector. Panfilov said, paraphrasing Suvorov, Panfilov's school of heroism also included a special system of incentives. The division commander rarely resorted to official awards and disciplinary actions. Much more effective, he believed, was simple human recognition of merit. A kind word, a handshake, gratitude before the formation. This was valued by the soldiers more than any medals. One of the secrets of Panfilov's success was his ability to speak to people in a language they understood. He did not use complex military terms, nor did he deliver long lectures. His speech was simple, figurative, filled with folk sayings and examples from life. Explaining anti-tank tactics, Ivan Vasilyevich might say, "A tank is like a bear, strong, formidable, but clumsy. And you are like hunters, quick, agile, striking at vulnerable spots." In a short time, just a few months, Panfilov managed to create a monolithic combat formation from diverse human material, capable of solving the most complex tasks. His pedagogical methods are still studied by military specialists, and the school of heroism he created became a model for many commanders of the Red Army. The Truth and Myths about the Feat of the Panfilovtsi is one of the most controversial pages in the history of the Great Patriotic War. The battle at Dubosakovo railway siding on November 16, 1941, became a symbol of the Soviet soldiers' resilience, but at the same time gave rise to decades of historical discussions and disputes. The first mention of the 28 Panfilov heroes appeared in the newspaper, quote, on November 27, 1941. War correspondent Alexander Krivitsky published an article, quote, where he told about soldiers who, at the cost of their lives, stopped German tanks on the approaches to Moscow. The article made a huge impression on readers. The country, exhausted by retreats and defeats, needed examples of heroism, proof that the enemy was not invincible. Political instructor Vasily Klochkov and his famous phrase, quote, became known to every Soviet person. The story of the 28 heroes entered school textbooks. Books were written about it, and films were made. The Panfilovtsi became a symbol of national resistance to fascism. However, in 1948, the Chief Military Prosecutor's Office of the USSR conducted an investigation into the circumstances of the battle at Dubosakovo railway siding. The results were unexpected. It turned out that some of the deceased heroes remained alive, and others did not participate in that battle at all. Political instructor Klochkov indeed died, but the exact circumstances of his death and the words he spoke could not be established. The memorandum of the chief military prosecutor stated that the story of the 28 Panfilovtsi is a fabrication by correspondent Krivitsky. This document was classified and became available to researchers only in the 1990s. Does this mean that there was no feat at all? Of course not. The battles on the Volokolamsk direction in November 1941 were exceptionally fierce. The Panfilovtsi indeed displayed mass heroism, stopping German tanks by all available means. General Panfilov's division played a key role in disrupting the German offensive on Moscow. But the specific story of the 28 heroes, as it turned out, was largely a literary adaptation, a collective image of many feats accomplished in that sector of the front. Ivan Vasilyevich Panfilov himself was never a witness to the battle at Dubosakovo railway siding. He died on November 18th, 2 days after the described events. But it was his methods of training soldiers, his tactical discoveries, and the morale he instilled in the division that made possible the steadfast resistance of the Panfilovtsi against numerically superior enemy forces. The role of General Panfilov in the real events of those days cannot be overestimated. He created a unique anti-tank defense system, taught soldiers not to fear enemy tanks, and instilled in them confidence in their own strength. Thanks to this, episodes of exceptional courage occurred throughout the division's defense sector, where small groups of Soviet soldiers stopped enemy tank columns. Why then did the feat of the Panfilovtsi become the object of such sharp controversy? The fact is that in Soviet times, any attempts at critical analysis of the official version were perceived as an assault on a sacred cow, as an insult to the memory of heroes. In the post-Soviet period, on the contrary, there was a tendency to indiscriminately deny Soviet myths, to strive to expose everything and everyone. The truth, as usual, lies in the middle. There was a feat, massive, collective, performed not only by those 28 soldiers, but by the entire division, by all the defenders of Moscow. Perhaps there were not exactly 28 heroes. Perhaps precisely that phrase attributed to Klochkov was not uttered. But the main thing was there: steadfastness, courage, self-sacrifice for the sake of saving the capital. The significance of the Panfilov myth for raising the morale of Soviet citizens during the war can hardly be overestimated. In the most difficult days, when the fate of the country was being decided, people needed examples of heroism. They needed symbols of resistance. The story of the 28 heroes who stopped German tanks gave hope, strengthened faith in victory. Modern historians agree. It is not so important exactly how many soldiers participated in that battle and what words were spoken. What is important is that the Panfilovtsi, the entire division as a whole, displayed exceptional courage and steadfastness, played a huge role in the defense of Moscow and in the psychological turning point of the entire war. Ivan Vasilyevich Panfilov managed in a short time to create an effective combat unit from diverse human material, capable of solving the most complex tasks. His methods of training soldiers, his tactical discoveries, are still studied by military specialists. And the school of heroism he created became a model for many commanders of the Red Army. The military leadership talent of Ivan Panfilov represents a unique phenomenon in the history of Soviet military art. Unlike many commanders of the initial period of the war, Panfilov managed to find effective answers to the tactical and strategic challenges of the Blitzkrieg, when most military leaders were constrained by pre-war dogmas. Military historians highlight several key aspects of Panfilov's leadership mastery. First and foremost is his ability for unconventional thinking. Under conditions of a catastrophic shortage of weapons, ammunition, and human resources, Ivan Vasilyevich developed the concept of quote, which allowed him to compensate for the enemy's numerical superiority. Panfilov's quote 1 was built on a system of strongholds instead of a continuous line of trenches. This allowed for creating high fire density in the most important directions, while generally economizing forces. Minefields, anti-tank ditches, and disguised firing positions were arranged between the strongholds. German tanks, having broken through the first line, fell into fire sacks where they were destroyed by flanking fire. The second most important trait of Panfilov as a military leader was his ability to foresee enemy actions. Quote 2 recalled the division chief of staff, Colonel Serebryakov. Quote 3. Panfilov knew how to read the terrain, understanding which areas were most convenient for tank attacks, and where the relief created natural obstacles. This allowed him to rationally distribute his limited forces, concentrating them in the most dangerous directions. The third factor in Panfilov's success was his ability to organize the interaction of various branches of service. In his division, artillery, infantry, sappers, and reconnaissance acted as a single organism. Special attention was paid to communication. Ivan Vasilyevich understood that without reliable command, even the best units turn into scattered groups. Comparing Panfilov with other Soviet commanders of that period, military historians note his astonishing ability to combine demandingness with care for people. While many commanders acted on the principle of at any cost, disregarding losses, Panfilov always sought to minimize damage, to preserve the lives of his soldiers. The soldier is the main weapon. This phrase of Ivan Vasilyevich reflects his approach to command. He understood, every fallen soldier is not just a statistical unit, but an irreplaceable loss of experience, skills, human potential. The phenomenon of Panfilov's division, which managed to effectively resist a numerically superior and better-equipped enemy, is explained by several factors. First and foremost, the highest morale of the soldiers, who trusted their commander and were ready to fight to the death. Then, excellent tactical training, where every soldier knew his maneuver and understood the overall defensive plan. And finally, skillful use of terrain and competent organization of the fire system. Panfilov's contribution to the development of Soviet military art can hardly be overestimated. His methods of anti-tank defense, tactics of small group actions, and principles of managing multinational units were studied and implemented throughout the front. Many of his innovations subsequently entered military regulations and manuals. Modern military historians are unanimous in their high assessment of Panfilov's military leadership talent. Professor of the General Staff Military Academy, Vasily Kiselev notes, Panfilov was 2 or 3 years ahead of the military thought of his time. What he intuitively applied in the autumn of '41 became common practice only by '43. American military historian David Glantz, in his book When Titans Clashed, writes, Panfilov demonstrated a rare combination of tactical flexibility and strategic vision. His methods of countering the blitzkrieg can be considered a classic example of an asymmetric response to the enemy's technological superiority. The name of General Panfilov and his soldiers is forever etched in the history of our country. In every city of Russia and the former republics of the Soviet Union, there are streets named after the Panfilov heroes. From Moscow to Alma-Ata, from St. Petersburg to Bishkek, the memory of the defenders of the capital lives on in the names of squares, schools, and libraries. A special place in this memorial geography is occupied by Dubosakovo siding. Here, at the site of the legendary battle, a magnificent memorial was unveiled in 1975. 6 monumental figures, 10 meters high, symbolize fighters of different nationalities who stood shoulder to shoulder in defense of Moscow. On the granite pedestal are carved the famous words, "Great is Russia, but there is nowhere to retreat. Moscow is behind us." Every year on November 23rd, Panfilov's birthday, veterans, schoolchildren, and public representatives gather here. Speeches are delivered, flowers are laid, and military historical reenactments take place. The memorial has become a center of patriotic education, a place where new generations learn about the feat of their grandfathers and great-grandfathers. A museum of the Panfilov Division has been established in Volokholamsk. Its exhibition tells about the combat path of the guardsmen, about the personality of General Panfilov, and about the fates of ordinary soldiers. Here are preserved the personal belongings of the division commander, his letters, documents, and awards. Of particular interest is the diorama, O, which recreates the panorama of the legendary battle. The image of Panfilov and his soldiers found vivid reflection in Soviet and Russian literature. Alexander Beck, in his novel, created an unforgettable portrait of the division commander, wise, calm, attentive to people. The book was translated into dozens of languages and became a desk reference for many military commanders, not only in the USSR, but also abroad. Japanese officers studied it as a textbook on military psychology and tactics. Konstantin Simonov, in his war correspondences and poems, immortalized the heroism of the Panfilovites. His famous poem, although not directly dedicated to the Panfilovites, conveys the same spirit of resilience and self-sacrifice that was inherent in Panfilov's division. Cinematography also contributed to the perpetuation of the hero's memory. In 1967, the film, 3, dedicated to the feat of the Panfilovites, was released. In the 2000s, the TV series, 4, was created, where one of the main characters is a former Panfilovite. And in 2016, the film, 5, was released, which caused heated discussions and rekindled interest in this page of history. The perception of Panfilov's image changed in different historical periods. In Soviet times, the emphasis was on the ideological component of the feat, communists and Komsomol members, loyal sons of the party, giving their lives for the motherland. General Panfilov was depicted as an ideal commander, the embodiment of all the best qualities of a Soviet military leader. In the 90s, amidst the re-examination of Soviet history, the feat of the Panfilovites was questioned. Archival documents were published that cast doubt on the official version of events. Some publicists even declared the story of the 28 heroes a myth, a propaganda fabrication. But in the 2000s, the pendulum swung the other way. Society grew tired of the nihilistic attitude towards the past, of attempts to expose everything and everyone. Interest in the true history of the war revived, free from both ideological clichés and sweeping denials of feats. Modern historians acknowledge, yes, the details of the battle at Dubosekovo siding might have been distorted in newspaper publications of those years. Perhaps there were not exactly 28 soldiers. Perhaps the exact phrase attributed to Klotchkov was not uttered. But the main thing remains undeniable. The Panfilovites displayed mass heroism, stopping the German offensive on Moscow. The figure of Ivan Vasilyevich Panfilov remains significant for modern Russia and the countries of the former USSR for several reasons. Firstly, his personality unites peoples. Russians, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, Ukrainians, Belarusians fought shoulder to shoulder in his division. Secondly, his command style, based on respect for the individual soldier, remains a model for modern military leaders. Thirdly, his tactical findings and methods of anti-tank defense are still studied in military academies. The memory of Panfilov and his division is of particular importance in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. Here, it is remembered that their sons formed the backbone of the legendary formation. In Alma-Ata and Bishkek, monuments to the generals stand, and streets, schools, and military units are named after him. International conferences dedicated to the feat of the Panfilovites are held annually, strengthening friendship between peoples. Thus, the memory of General Panfilov and his soldiers continues to live on, overcoming the boundaries of time and space, uniting generations and peoples. What legacy did General Panfilov leave us? What are the lessons of his life and command path for the modern generation? These questions remain relevant, even though more than 80 years have passed since those heroic days. First and foremost, Panfilov teaches us the value of the human person. In an age of technology and artificial intelligence, we sometimes forget that the most important thing in war and in peaceful life is the human being, with their character, will, and intellect. Ivan Vasilyevich saw in every soldier not just an executor of orders, but an individual with their own strengths, which needed to be revealed and directed towards the common cause. This principle is more relevant today than ever. Modern leaders in any field, from business to public administration, can learn a great deal from Panfilov. His ability to listen to subordinates, trust their competence, and encourage initiative from below. This is precisely what distinguishes an effective leader of the 21st century. Panfilov's second crucial lesson is the ability to act under limited resources. His division never had enough weapons, ammunition, or transport. But the division commander did not waste time complaining. Instead, he sought creative solutions. He compensated for the lack of material resources with intellectual and moral factors. Tactical ingenuity, fighting spirit, and mutual assistance. In the modern world, despite technological progress, we constantly face limitations: temporal, financial, and personnel. The ability to achieve results not thanks to ideal conditions, but despite their absence. This is what Panfilov's experience teaches us. The third lesson is the significance of the moral factor. Panfilov understood: without faith in the righteousness of one's cause, without self-confidence, no weapon would help. He created a special atmosphere of brotherhood in the division, where everyone felt part of a large family, where national differences did not divide, but enriched the collective. Today, when the world is torn by conflicts on national and religious grounds, Panfilov's experience in creating a multinational combat brotherhood acquires special value. His division was a miniature model of a multinational state, where each people retained their identity, but all worked towards a common goal. The fourth lesson is the importance of personal example. Panfilov never demanded from his subordinates what he did not do himself. He slept in the same conditions as the soldiers, ate the same food, and wore the same greatcoat. In moments of danger, he always appeared in the most difficult sector. In the modern world, where there is often a disconnect between the words and actions of leaders, Panfilov's principle of unity between word and deed becomes particularly relevant. True authority is built not on position, but on personal example. Preserving the historical memory of Panfilov and his division is of fundamental importance for national self-awareness. This is not just a tribute to the heroes of the past. It is a living connection between generations, a moral compass that helps us navigate the complex modern world.